Kristin, and you're listening to Podcast and Amplify, a podcast for women entrepreneurs who want to amplify their voice and brand through podcasting and grow a wildly successful business. I'm the executive producer and host of 2 shows and an entrepreneur, and I love helping women grow their visibility, mindset, and business to the next level. Each week, I share tips on how to launch and leverage your podcast, and I'm bringing on the very best business leaders to give you advice on how to build your business empire. Let's amplify your voice and business. Welcome back to Podcast and Amplify. So today I want to talk about something that I've been hearing a lot of questions around, and because I know that podcasting is such a great way to network and increase your visibility, this topic I think is really important for any entrepreneur, whether you have your own podcast or not. Even as a podcaster, you should be considering how you can become a podcast guest on other people's podcasts. You being on other people's podcasts is a great way to get in front of other audiences and increase your credibility. So when people see that you are a sought after guest on other people's shows, it says a lot, and you're able to share your knowledge and your experience with so many more people. For those of us who have podcasts, we know what some of the challenges are when it comes to guests, when it comes to the way people approach us to be guests on a show. And so I'll give you some sort of do's and don'ts around that. And then I'll do a follow-up episode where I talk about how to really leverage your appearance on these podcast shows. I think this is a great topic to go over, and I think it needs its own show because I've had people tell me, oh, I've been on this show and I've been a guest on that show, but I don't know what to do with the episode. I don't know how to promote it. I don't know what to do after. So I will definitely go over that the next episode because I want to let you know what you need to do during your interview and then after your interview. So stay tuned for that next week. But right now, let's dive into being a great guest on podcasts. So first, let's talk about how we want to approach being on a podcast. Being a guest on other people's podcasts, like I said, is a really great way to increase your visibility. And so it's really important to remember that you're tapping into the trust that the podcast host has with their audience, which makes it critical that you show up in a way that really aims to serve and to offer value. And being able to share your experience and knowledge with audiences that could eventually become your fans or your customers is a really great opportunity. So before you reach out to podcasts, you want to start with making a list of 15 to 25 podcasts in your niche or podcasts with a similar demographic where your knowledge and your expertise will really add value. So you want to make sure that you have created a list of really aligned podcasts. This is so important because you want to make sure that you're getting in front of the right audiences. If you're going on a podcast that has an audience that would never buy from you, would never really be interested in what your service is, that's not really going to help you. And it's not going to be super valuable for the podcast audience. So then you want to create a spreadsheet that includes the podcast name, the host name, topics, the number of subscribers, their website, social media, and you just want to populate that with all of your research. And that way you have this database of podcasts that you know you want to be on, and you know they align with your brand, and you can keep track of your pitching, your yeses and your nos, your follow-ups. It's just a really great way to stay organized. So then you want to research each podcast to find out what their podcast pitching process is. And it doesn't hurt to follow the hosts on social media and engage with them in a really not, I want something from you kind of way, just a way that's like, hey, I'd love to get to know you a little bit better. You know, you're kind of information gathering and trying to create a genuine relationship to potentially be on their show. But you want to make sure that you go through their pitching process. So if they have a form on their website, that's how you want to reach out to them. If they ask you to email them, that's how you want to reach out to them. So definitely go to their website if they have one, anything they have linked in their social media, and try and figure out what that process is. That way you're not just sliding into their DMs and annoying them if that's not the way that they want to be approached by potential guests. And so this is really important. You want to actually listen to the show that you're pitching. So think about it. If someone said, hey, I really want to be on your show, yet they've never listened to your show, that doesn't really show them that you are that interested in their brand and what they offer and what they have created. So I make sure that I listen to at least 2 episodes at a minimum of the podcast that I'll be on. It also helps me to determine if the podcast is a good fit. And it's hard to know that if you haven't listened to any episodes. So I want to give you a really helpful research tool for finding similar podcasts in your niche. And it's called podchaser.com. So it's like the IMDb for podcasts, and you can search for podcasts, creators, and guests all in one place. So that's podchaser.com. And I'll put that link in the show notes. And I'm not affiliated with them, but I just really like their interface, and they're really trying to create one space where podcasters and creators and guests can all find each other, because right now it's a little spread across different platforms. And I found it super valuable in researching other podcasts, and you can do it by niche. So check that out. Here's a don't. Here's an absolute don't do when you want to be on a podcast. So don't meet someone and say, like, I would say, hi, my name's Kristin. Can I be on your podcast? I've had people do that to me, not even like warming me up a little bit, not even really knowing that much about me from, say it's a networking conversation. And I tell them I have a podcast and they're like, oh, hey, can I be on it? And first of all, it creates a really uncomfortable situation, because my first instinct is like, well, no, because I don't know you. And you're just asking me, like, you haven't told me why you want to be on my podcast. It makes it feel like you just want to be on a podcast, and you're not really being thoughtful about, is this the right fit for both of us? So that's a don't that I would say to definitely avoid. Make sure you do all the steps that I just talked about before. You do your research, you make sure that you have your list and that they're aligned. And in that spreadsheet that you create, you can even put notes about, why is this a good fit? And that's what you can tell the person when you're reaching out to them or applying to be on their show. So that leads me into pitching. So now that you have your list of podcasts that are the right fit, it's time to pitch yourself to the podcast. And remember that the more you pitch, the more chances you have. So that list of 15 to 25, definitely reach out to that many, because it just increases the chances that you will get a yes and be on more shows. And then also, the more valuable targeted information you can share, the more likely you'll get yeses. So the number of podcasts that you pitch to and showing the value, those are going to increase your chances of getting yeses. Yes, we do want you on our show. And so that's really motivating. So I would definitely recommend to keep those 2 things in mind. Hey explorers, we'll get back to the show in just a moment, but I wanted to take just a few seconds to invite you to the free workshop that I created. It's called The 3 Secrets to Starting Your Successful Podcast. Now, it's all about helping you to start your dream podcast so that you can share your voice and expand your business. If you want to join, just go to explorerandyou.com. It's totally free. All right, friend, back to the show. Okay, so pitching. So first, you want to come up with a list of topic ideas that will benefit similar audiences. So you want to write down what you'll talk about, what differentiates you from others, and just have that running list of the topics that you can really talk about passionately and that brings a lot of value to others. So then you want to research the right person to contact, as I mentioned before. You want to research who to contact and how they want to be contacted. And then if they want you to send an email inquiry instead of submitting a form, the subject line should make it clear that you want to be a guest on the show. So a good subject line would be podcast guest pitch, colon, and then your topic. So that's really clear, and it will make it more likely that they'll know what you want and open your email. But if they have a form, just fill out the form and make sure you include those topic ideas that you came up with before and what differentiates you. Okay, so then in your email inquiry, you want to write your pitch and you want to include a brief bio, any other media appearances or mentions or past podcast episodes that you've been on. You want to let them know how you will promote the episode. And if you have any audience statistics that are relevant, it's a great thing to include. And then if you have a special offer, like a guide or a workbook or a discount code that you want to share, definitely include that. And then include all of your contact information, including your website, your phone number, and your email address. Okay, so we talked about how you want to approach being a guest. It's all about value and service and connection. We talked about the types of things that you need to do before you pitch to podcasts. We talked about pitching to podcasts, what you want to include. And so now let's talk about how to be a really great guest. So number one, you want to make sure that any correspondence you have with the podcast host, that you're on top of it, you're timely. You could even send a bio and a photo and links to your website and social media before they ask for it, because that's something that every podcast host is going to want. So make sure you have that ready. I can attest, I love it when people have just this little, it's like a mini media kit. And so I love it when people send that over. Make sure your image is like 1 megabyte, like not this huge image. So make sure that you are timely with your correspondence. If they send a link to book your interview, then make sure you book your interview right away. Make sure you send them the assets that they ask for. And then on the day of, make sure that you're prepared. Make sure that you have good sound, that your microphone sounds good, that you're in a quiet space, that your notifications are turned off. What happens a lot with some of my guests is they wear earbuds with a microphone that's attached to the cord. And sometimes that creates a scratchy noise, which then I have to tell them, I can hear that. And so if you have that, don't wear like chunky jewelry around your neck, tie your hair back, like just make sure that it's not a problem. Another thing is I always ask my guests to wear earbuds or headphones because the sound quality is just so much better than when you don't have something. Inevitably, it sounds echoey when you don't have earbuds or headphones on. I think people don't think it's going to sound bad, but trust me, it doesn't always sound bad, but it sounds way better when you have those things. Okay, so let's talk about being prepared. So if you have any sort of nerves around being interviewed on a show, maybe it's your first or second time, you might have a little bit of nerves, and that's totally normal. And so what I like to do is I like to have notes to rely on. And it's great being on a podcast because if you're not on video, then you can easily look at your notes and no one's going to know that that's what you're doing. So I have 3 to 4 talking points in a bulleted list just to remind me of what do I want to talk about. Sometimes I'll have sub points just to keep me on track and make sure that I'm hitting the important things that I'm there to talk about. So I definitely recommend having notes and making it really simple and scannable. That way you're not reading because you don't really have time to do that as a guest, but just have these reminders to jog your memory if need be. So that's a really great way to just prepare and go in knowing what you're talking about, looking at past things that maybe you've written, like past blogs. I'll refer those because sometimes I have really great content that I've already created. And so I just refer back to that,
scan it. I have it in my brain right before the podcast. I use that to help me write my note. And that's really how I prepare is I think about what is going to be the most valuable thing for this specific podcast and the person's listeners. And then how can I speak to those things? And what have I already written before? What have I already talked about before in a past podcast, perhaps? So those are just some notes around how to be prepared and make sure that you go into the interview feeling confident, because the more prepared you are, the more confident you'll feel and the more confident you'll sound.
So when you're talking about any offer, make sure that it is, first of all, okay with your podcast host and that it's something that is super valuable and ties into what you talked about during your episode. And you want to make sure that it feels really organic when you do mention it. Most podcast hosts will ask you at the end of the interview to share where people can connect with you or if you have an offer. So that makes it really easy. You don't have to keep plugging it throughout the show. But if it feels right and you feel like there's a question that you were asked and you have a really great resource that you can offer people, that's a great time to mention it. But you definitely don't want to like ram it in every chance you get. Unless you've talked with the host and it's a collaboration and they understand that that's why they're having you on the show and you've sort of worked it out. I've heard people do that where the show is essentially like one big advertisement for the person's upcoming course or workshop or whatever service it is that they're offering. But that is something that you do when you have a really good relationship with a podcast host and you've decided that's how you're going to approach the show and that it's going to be a collaboration. But definitely don't do that with someone who doesn't expect you to do that. That takes planning in advance. Generally, you'll be on a show where you don't know the host beforehand. And so talking about what you offer in a really organic way is the best approach. And finally, just come open and prepared with your topics, that you know what your talking points are, you know what you'll be sharing as a lead magnet, and come as open as you can be and ready to just have a fun conversation. I think bringing the right energy is so important. I've been so fortunate to have guests that just create a really great vibe and energy, and they're so excited and happy to be on the show and to share the thing that they're passionate about. So just show up in that mindset and you're bound to have a really great conversation. It is really just an opportunity to share what you know, and podcasts are fun. Podcasts are supposed to be a really great, fun way to connect with people. So if you follow all of these strategies and tips that I've given today, you'll be a fantastic guest on any podcast. So I hope these tips were helpful. And next week, we'll be back with an episode on how to leverage your podcast appearance, because I know if you do these things, you will be getting on podcasts and you want to make sure that you make the most of them. So thanks for listening, and we'll see you next week. If you loved today's episode, please subscribe so you don't miss a show. And rating and reviewing this podcast is the best way to help support us. Always remember, your voice and what you have to offer is needed in the world. Until next week, take care.